Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you about the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park. My name is Doug Wilson. I'm a wolf researcher and I'm a national park and wildlife environmentalist and enthusiast. So we just want to start by asking you a question. Why are wolves reintroduced in Yellowstone National Park? And the answer is actually a controversy. For you see, local industry and environmental groups have been debating and battling this for decades on this exact issue. Should we reintroduce wolves into Yellowstone? And this has been going on for between the 1970s and 1990s. The gray wolves had been eliminated from this park area in 1926, the last year that known wolves were killed. When these predators were eradicated, the effects and the absence of them were not yet known. For many decades prior to 1926, Congress had given in to the pressure of local cattle and livestock industries in regards to the impact and control of wolves. The wolves were killing cattle and livestock at high numbers, causing economic impacts to the industry. So in 1907, Congress enacted the Animal Damage Control Act, or program, and this program allowed the killing of thousands of wolves and predators in the U.S. And in Yellowstone Park itself, there were hundreds that were killed between 1900 and 1926. To Congress and to the ranchers, the wolves were considered non-essential in Yellowstone, per the articles from the Endangered Species Act. Now, this classification of wolves as being non-essential gave government officials and ranchers and the livestock industries the leeway to manage the wolves on their own by killing them all. But were the wolves really essential in Yellowstone? And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. Are wolves essential? The answer is also a controversy. Again, local livestock industry and environmental groups argued this very question. Because in 1926 through 1966, there were no wolves, and there was no controversy that anyone even cared about. But there was definitely a big impact on the wildlife and the ecology that had begun, and it needed to be addressed and fixed. So when the wolves had been eradicated, the Yellowstone elk population grew very large. In fact, it grew too large. And two things happened because of the wolf predator being eliminated. The first was that the elk pushed the limits of the Yellowstone carrying capacity. And then second, the elk heavily grazed on the willows and aspen and cottonwood plants. The impact of the Yellowstone elk overpopulation wasn't even considered when they started eradicating the wolves. In fact, here's some of the things that became of this. First, when the wolves were gone and the elk overpopulated the park, they started to see the beaver population was greatly decreasing because they lost the ability to create their own habitat from these willows and from the aspen and cottonwoods that they used to build their dams, and they were losing their food sources. And all of this was because of the impact that the elk ate all the willows that were used to create their habitats. Secondly, with the lack of beaver dams and the population, it had an impact on waterway hydrology, which caused problems and reduced natural water tables and habitats for fish and bird life, and had an impact on the vegetation of the park. So you can say the wolf actually impacted and changed rivers, streams, fish and bird wildlife, as well as the vegetation. In fact, you can say the wolves actually impacted the whole ecosystem of Yellowstone. So in 1966, the idea of reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone was brought to Congress. And it took 3 decades of debates and research, but finally in 1995, Congress and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services reintroduced the gray wolf to Yellowstone. So I've already spoken to you about the decades of controversy about wolves in the Yellowstone National Park. Now let's just talk about the pros and the cons of reintroducing wolves into national parks themselves. And then you can determine for yourselves what side is worth considering in regards to the question, are wolves essential? So on the pro side, people will argue that wolves bring back balance to the ecosystem. I already talked about the impact of the ecosystem when wolves were eradicated, the impact of the elk and the deer population, and the overpopulation, which led to beavers, decreased population, and led to the impact on the waterways, the fish, and the bird and wildlife. The second pro is that wolves actually are good for ecotourism. People go to the parks to be able to see the wolves in their natural habitat. Third way is wolves can actually be controlled and not prey on livestock. So, such as GPS devices can be attached to wolves so you could track and monitor their movement, and fences can be created around the livestock for protection and for protection of people. The fourth is wolves really do help in revegetation and fish and wildlife population, as I discussed before. Now on the con side, it's primarily to do with economic impact. First, the economic impact to ranchers, because the wolves are predators to the sheep and cattle livestock that these ranchers are dependent upon for their financial livelihood. And then second of all, there's an economic impact to all of us as taxpayers. Figures estimate that the cost of wolf reintroduction to be somewhere between $200,000 and $1 million in the United States. So, giving you some information, hopefully you can make your own decisions, but in conclusion, in my own opinion, there's no doubt about the significance and role in the reintroduction of wolves to balance the ecosystems in Yellowstone National Parks and national parks in general, and for tourism as well. But I realize that there's controversy and there's debate on the other side. So the question to you is, where do you stand on this controversy? Are you for wolves or against wolves in the parks?